Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for Tech Career Conversations, How to Forge a Data Science Career in 2024. My name is Dakota Nunley. I'm the Content Strategy Manager here at Udacity. And today I'm very excited to be joined by our very own Erin Hoffman. She's a data scientist and a senior technical content developer here at Udacity, where she's led and launched countless cutting-edge courses and nanodegree programs. And I know she's going to share some incredible tips and guidance with us today in all things data science. Erin, thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Perfect. Yeah, well, we'll start from the top. I'd love to get an idea of what inspired you to pursue this career. And yeah, just tell us about your journey into the field of data science.
So I started out in computer science. So not just the coding, but all of the computer architecture, operating systems, all of that stuff is what I studied originally. Love that stuff, but just building applications was a little bit less motivating to me than solving problems and answering questions using some of those same techniques. So I went to graduate school where I learned a lot of computational social science techniques and really started getting into data science with the carpentries. So data carpentry, software carpentry is this very practical hands-on workshops, and started going to those and then volunteering at those. And then also have done some small data science projects in nonprofit spaces. That's always really rewarding. And then mostly have been in data science education since then. So both at a coding bootcamp and then now here at Udacity.
Great. Yeah, thank you. When you look at the career that you've had so far to date, what are some of the biggest challenges you've faced, particularly when you first started out in this field, and how did you overcome them?
So kind of an unusual answer that I'll give here is I was not using software libraries to their full extent. So particularly the pandas library, I did graduate level research, hand coding things in Python that was absolutely unnecessary. I wasted so much of my time. And so I want to just always start with that of if you are coding by hand, you're calculating statistics, you're aggregating data, you're doing anything like that, and you're writing for loops, don't do that. Things like pandas can do that math for you faster and with a handful of lines of code compared to doing that by hand. So that was one of the biggest things, was working in a more informal self-taught setting, not learning those best practices and sort of reinventing the wheel was one of the biggest challenges early on, for sure.
So it sounds like you've worked at coding boot camps with that in mind, and also at the graduate, more formal education level. How would you define your graduate school experience in terms of tangible skills that you have today?
Yeah, so I was in this kind of niche space working on a Wikimedia Foundation grant. So Wikimedia Foundation is sort of the parent organization over Wikipedia, and thinking about how you can use machine learning and AI to make the editing and the contribution to Wikipedia more efficient, less spam, all of these kind of goals that sometimes conflict with each other. Because if you make it easier for someone to edit, then you make it easier for someone to spam. And so where I was really looking at was evaluating AI tools, not just against these benchmarks, which benchmarks can be useful. They help you to really compare state-of-the-art models against each other, but they don't really tell you in a practical sense for this application, can you do the thing that you want to do with a machine learning model? So that is something that even here in Udacity all the time, working with the product team here, figuring out okay, these models are cool, but what can we do with them? Are they reliable? So I learned a lot of the techniques for a more qualitative evaluation of these tools, as well as just practicing the sort of end-to-end workflow of developing a question, figuring out what tools I need to answer the question, and then communicating my findings to someone else at the end.
Great. Yeah. And when we zero in on the skills aspect for aspiring data scientists and everything, it sounds like you touched on it a bit, but what would you consider essential skills? And then on the flip side of that, what do you think are skills that folks often over index on learning that might not be as applicable in the day to day and real world?
So, Python programming, number one by far, essential skill. It is something that is the core shared language across the engineering teams and the data science teams. And it just unlocks the ability to use all kinds of tools from, again, like statistical tools through deep learning, through these, LLMs, generative AI tools that we have now, like Python works for all of those things. Data visualization also comes in a lot, both for exploring the data, kind of figuring out what's in there, as well as communicating findings at the end. So some level of data visualization skill. It doesn't need to be, you can make the prettiest graph that has ever been made, but it needs to be, you understand what is an appropriate way to visualize this type of data. How can we make sure that the graphs are clear and accessible? That kind of stuff. Definitely essential for any kind of data scientist. And that's closely related to like understanding and communicating things about the data. There's no pure like hard skills in data science. It's always you're going back to the problem. What are you trying to solve here? And then you're communicating your findings out to people. You're not just like deploying something and it works because someone clicked a button and some action happened. You need to make sure that the actual outcome is what you're trying to make it be. So those are kind of the top three, I would say, Python, data visualization, and like data understanding and communication related skills. I think something that people over-index on because it's fun and they want to learn about it is learning every single machine learning algorithm out there and like trying to collect them like Pokemon cards. And like that's something where it does matter if you're doing a machine learning project to understand some of the fundamentals of like what is the difference between a tree-based model and a linear model, especially if you're trying to interpret some of like the parameters of the model. But day to day, a lot of data science is not machine learning. A lot of it is more fundamentals, more asking questions about the data. And you can always go and learn more about these algorithms rather than kind of memorizing the steps to create these different things from scratch. Same thing goes for the generative AI, the newer stuff of like, a lot of people will start with talking about the transformer because we think it's really cool, but you do not need to actually understand the attention mechanism in a transformer to be able to use it and do cool stuff with it.
Great. Yeah, it's funny you say that. We'll definitely dive into more AI ML questions. I'm curious with that communication piece. So it sounded like what you were saying, a lot of it is communicating findings. Did you find that in more formal education settings, you were well equipped in that area, or is that more on the job that you had to learn or from a supervisor of some sort? Curious there.
I think the academic setting prepares you for it somewhat, but it's a really different audience. And so the academic audience, they want to know all of these technical details. And if you write an academic paper and you don't include what exactly model did you use here, and especially if you're doing any kind of statistical test, they want to know about things like p-values. That is the audience who already knows about all of these data science constructs. And so they want you to tell them so that they really will believe you in whatever your finding is. Data science in industry, they're just going to have to trust you. Like if you're talking to a CEO, especially about some finding you've had, they're not going to be asking you about feature importances in your model and how it, again, if it matters that it's a linear or a tree-based model, that's not something that they're ever going to ask you. inherently are trusting your expertise. And so you really need to focus on the takeaways, the like examples of where the model's getting things right and wrong. That's something that you can really like dig into and understand what's happening and not just the metrics.
Got it. Yeah, thank you for elaborating. So it sounds like there's a lot of moving pieces in tech in general, but especially with the place that we're at right now in terms of AI and ML. How do you personally stay updated on the latest trends and technologies in data science? And the reason I ask too is I'm curious how you distill the noise from like what you had mentioned, the actual tangible applications of the technologies.
Yes. So in general, keeping up with content creators on like LinkedIn, Twitter, X, and some of their like blogs I specifically follow. I also go to a good amount of meetups. And I would say one of the best rules of thumb I've found for who is going to be a reliable person to listen to really is their length of experience. Because some people, they learn how to do it and then they immediately turn around and start creating content. And that can be really good for introductory principles. Someone who's a beginner might have that insight into things that are confusing that someone who's been doing this for a long time wouldn't even think to clarify. But if I'm looking at, are people really using this tool? Or there's this technique that I'm seeing emerge, but does this term apply here? Or is it separate? Like, is this a distinction that people are drawing when they talk about things? For that, going to especially a meetup presentation and especially the Q&A portion of a meetup presentation with someone who's a real expert in the field, I feel like that's where I can really start listening and start seeing like, okay, this is something that's totally theoretical. No one's doing this in the real world right now. It's just like in the academic papers. Versus this is something everyone is doing and they don't even, they use this acronym without defining it because they're just assuming, of course, everyone knows what this thing is. Those are like the really key things for me, thinking from like a forward-looking, strategic, what's like really happening out there kind of perspective.
Love that. Yeah. And quick follow up, those meetups, are you finding those on meetup.com or are there various forums or publications that you follow to find those?
Yeah, I think meetup.com. Also, I learned about a lot of them when I was working in a boot camp setting because part of the boot camp like whole like career package was these things that the graduates all needed to do to get a job because the boot camp really relies on the job statistics for like going forward to be like, we're a great boot camp. You should come here because people get jobs. And so one of the things that's a requirement for the graduates there was going to meetups. So that's where I really saw a lot of like, where are my students going to these meetups? And also if it's terrible, they'll probably tell me because they're going to meetups every single week. So I kind of acquired them over time like that. And then also there's some Slack communities that I'm in, and I'm in New York City. So a lot of them have like NYC channels. And that's also a good place to find out about meetups that aren't necessarily in like a community that I consistently would go to. They might just be more of like a one-off presentation. We've also found Udacity authors from those kind of meetups. So it's, yeah, it's a lot of like mixture of like really consistent. I know this is going to be a great presentation every time I go. And then also, I have no idea what this is going to be, but sure, why not? There'll be free pizza.
It makes it fun. It's a surprise. Great. Yeah. Thank you. For folks transitioning into this career path or starting, like embarking on the journey into this, what advice would you give to those people?
Yeah. So one of the first things I think is really important to clarify when someone is trying to get into data science is where you're starting from. So there are some people who are coming from, they don't really have the statistics background, or the coding background and you just need to learn everything. And then it's kind of obvious, like, yep, you need to learn everything here. But then a lot more people are either they're programmers, they're developers who want to get into more the data side, which definitely was where I was coming from, or they're more like scientists, especially like they've done some grad school and they want to get into the tech industry, even though maybe what they studied was chemistry or biology or something like that. And so just when you go into learning about data science, most of the time the content is going to cover everything. But if you know already, like, I know how to code, then don't like spend extra time going through the how to code content. Like, that's not going to be valuable for you. And like similarly, if you already know the stats stuff, you don't need to slog through doing practice problems like you've never seen it before. I think that's something that can be really uncomfortable for people who think of themselves as a good student and are like, I'm going to do every single little thing. And that's just not practical if you already know some of this stuff. And you're going to also want to be prepared to leverage that background when you're trying to get your first data science job, to say, I'm not someone who's completely new to this. Look at this background. Look how my previous experience made me interested in data science. I think a lot of people undervalue that previous experience because they think of themselves as, I switched careers, so I'm starting from nowhere. And you're probably not starting from nowhere. And a great one, I didn't make this up, but a great way to help yourself to spin that is to say, I'm a data scientist with a background in, and then whatever your background is. It helps you to not sort of stick on the, I'm a data scientist. I'm not sure if I really believe that about myself, but I'm saying it. And it helps you really emphasize the background that you have and like what you'd be bringing to the table, because data science is a pretty new discipline. Even the people who are really senior in data science, they mostly didn't start out in data science because that was not a thing. Like 15 years ago is sort of the beginning of modern data science. So on some level, everyone's new, everyone's figuring it out, everyone's bringing their prior expertise. Another thing that I always like to emphasize people who are just getting started in the field is that data scientist as a title is not the only job title where you get to do this cool stuff. So at some companies, a data analyst is the entry-level person and a data scientist is a senior-level person. They're doing the exact same work tasks, but it's just a matter of seniority and how many years you've been working in the field. Our like Udacity content is not structured that way. Our data analyst is the more foundational skills. Data scientist is getting into more in-depth. So that's not consistent everywhere, but that's something to just be aware of, is that if you're only searching for data scientist as your actual job title, you're going to miss out on a lot of job listings because not every company is doing the same thing. Another thing that I think people, they often are wondering just like, what kind of company should I be going for to do a data science job? And my recommendation for most people just starting out is actually going for a smaller company to get a taste of a lot of different things. Because in a small company, the data scientist is really responsible for everything. They're maintaining the data pipelines, they're doing the presentations, they're creating the dashboards that other members of the company are using to make decisions. They have a hand in all of that. And so that's a great way, first of all, to get that experience that you can talk about it in future job interviews, but also to figure out, what do you actually like doing? Because then if you go into a larger company, then you can get some more of the mentorship and start to specialize. And so that's where things like, do you like doing more of the pipeline? Even there's a specific role out there called an analytics engineer, which is like a data engineer, but specific for analytics. There's all of these like specific roles if you really want to get into causal analysis, really want to get into forecasts. At a company that has a massive data team, you can get into those kind of specializations. But I wouldn't usually recommend when you're just starting out to try to do that because you don't know necessarily what you want to do. And it also kind of narrows you on what you could do afterwards. So smaller companies, they're more likely also to take a chance on more junior people. I find they're more likely to have the attitude of you can figure it out once you get here. So that's, I would say, being a data analyst at a small company can be actually way better for a career than being a data scientist at like a name brand company. And a lot of people don't realize that.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that insight. That's eye-opening. Going back to the explosion of AI and ML, in terms of both the role of data scientists at the macro level, and then when you look at your own day-to-day, how has this shift impacted your role? It sounds like since graduate school, you've been interested in this, so maybe not so much, but I'm curious at a high level there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is the code copilots. So something that used to be the case is like you really, really need to learn the exact coding syntax. You need to kind of have these names of methods and parameters. You need to have them memorized to be able to get through your job effectively. And I think now we're really seeing it's about the conceptual. It's not really so much about what is the difference between these two like pandas methods. And that's something that just has been a big shift for me is I start by thinking like what are the rows and columns that I want to have? And then the step from knowing what you want to have, what the structure of the existing data is, and as long as you can articulate, I want to drop this column, I want this column to be split into multiple columns, I want this data to be split into multiple rows. Once you really have that mental model of what needs to happen, something like GitHub Copilot or ChatGPT can help you turn that into the appropriate syntax really quickly. So I think that's been the biggest shift to me is that you still need to make a plan because if you just ask ChatGPT, like, what should I do with this data? It's not going to give you a good suggestion. In general, numbers and are like not the strong suit of these tools, but they also don't have the full context of like, why are you using data in the first place? What are you trying to solve here? If you can get to what is the problem, then those tools can really ease that like implementation and getting stuck on syntax and getting errors that you don't know what to deal with. Like that's been so much less of a problem in the last couple of years with the new AI tools.
Love that. Yeah, thank you. In the age of content, of TikTok, of YouTube shorts, of LinkedIn newsletters, what is the worst advice, if you want to call it that you commonly hear told to data scientists?
Yeah, I think the worst thing that I've seen is the idea that you need a PhD to be in this field. I think that's something that people with PhDs like to say to make it seem more like the field is closed to sort of upstart people who don't have that experience. I think that's the single biggest like misconception. I think the idea that you need to memorize a ton of stuff. This is more something you'll see in like an influencer related to data science, where the idea is that if you memorize something, you memorize like a couple bullet points about this thing, that like that's really the key to getting into data science. So that like as long as you know what's random about a random forest, then like you'll make it. So many places have take-home interview assessments at this point. Like they're going to know that all you know are the bullet points if you can't do something practical. So I think that's the biggest thing, especially LinkedIn. I see the here's this list with a bunch of emojis of all the things that you need to know to be a data scientist, with the idea that you just memorize these things and then you're good. And especially with AI tools we have now, even just with Google, um, memorizing things is not the most essential skill for really anyone at this point.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you. When we look at networking, how, in your experience and in your opinion, how do you recommend people find others interested in the field? Are there any specific online communities, forums, conferences? I know you had mentioned meetups, but curious on anything else there.
Yeah, I think um, PyData, which is like Python plus data put together, is a series of conferences. They have global locations, so that can be a challenge for sometimes. This is a very like specifically San Francisco Bay Area is where this thing happens. Or to me, I'm New York City. There is a lot of data science community there, but not necessarily as big as some other places. But PyData has truly global conferences multiple times a year all around the world. And that's a really good mixture also of the academic and practitioner side, and just in general understanding like what people are talking about, going into talking to the people at the booths to understand your hiring, what are you looking for, what are the biggest challenges, what are the skills that people are lacking when you're trying to hire. People at those conferences are very friendly and very willing to answer those kinds of questions. So that would be my biggest. Everyone in data science, I think getting involved with PyData is great. Otherwise, I think it tends to be a little bit more specialized. And meetup.com is a good place to find out where are people talking about different specific techniques. But in general, if you're going in person, especially to an event, but also with virtual events, just being willing to share your LinkedIn and ask someone to connect is a really good way to keep up with people. The thing that sometimes we worry about is like spamming people, but if they're going to this kind of event, they also want to meet more people. And so that's a great place to grow connections, is just going up and talking to people, whether they're like they're staffing a booth at a conference, they're the speaker at a meetup, or they're the person sitting next to you at a meetup. I've met great people all those ways.
Perfect. Yeah, and we'll be sure and link those in the description here. Thanks, Erin. When we look at the space as a whole, I'd love to know, in your opinion, what's one thing people are talking too much about in data science, and what's one thing you feel people aren't talking enough about?
I think something people are talking too much about, and this is maybe not that specific to data science, but really trying to estimate how much percentage of your job is going to change with AI. That's something that a lot of people are throwing out different numbers and trying to make arguments based on that. And I think that's not a great thing to focus on right now. The AI stuff is a tool just like these other tools that we use. And so it's important to be keeping up with what can these tools do well right now? What are these tools still really terrible at? And so we always should avoid using them for. That's what I think matters. Thinking about, is my job going to be reduced by this percentage, or my department going to be reduced by this percentage by AI? It's kind of ahistorical in general. When we get more tools, it allows us to do more stuff. And usually that is the goal. I think most data science teams would love to have the resources to run more analysis, answer more questions. It's not this zero sum thing where like we all need to really like worry about AI taking our jobs. Something I think we should be talking more about, I think things related to interpretability. I think that those tend to be an afterthought, or they tend to be something that's required by some stakeholder, and so it's tacked on to the end. But to me, that should be really like a first class thing that in every analysis, you're making sure that you understand, at least on some level, how the model is making the decisions that it's making, um, both for reasons of like bias that can become problematic of it's making decisions based on certain zip codes, things like that, but also just the mistakes that the model can be making because it learns these spurious correlations. So it learns like there's more stop signs when it's sunny out. That would be a problem. So those are the kind of thing that I think we tend to overlook because we're just like, well, the model is performing well, but understanding how the model's making its decisions, I think is something that it's not really as like cool, but I think we should spend more time talking about.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Erin. Yeah, this has been eye-opening. And shifting gears, I'd love to wrap things up into a fun, not that this hasn't been fun already, but a fun series of questions. So I'll send a question your way and you tell me the first thing that comes to mind. Sound like a plan?
Sure.
Python or R?
Python. I think I've said that enough times.
Yeah. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Tableau, overrated or underrated?
I don't know. I think probably underrated, or underutilized at least. Yeah. Tableau is great.
Google Sheets or Excel?
I like Google Sheets for that web connectivity. I use Google Sheets every day.
Chat GPT, Claude, or other?
I use ChatGPT personally. Maybe I'm missing something with Claude, but it's been ChatGPT for me.
Most interesting data set you've worked with?
I'm gonna give a sort of corny answer. Is I've been working with some Udacity data sets, including our iconography data, and working on that for some research internally. So love working with our silly little purple and blue icons.
Love that. Biggest myth about data science?
I think that it's only for senior experts who've been doing this forever.
Best career advice you've ever received?
I think the fact that you are never going to understand everything and you need to learn to accept that. Also a former thinking of myself as a good student person, I really needed that.
Worst career advice you've ever received?
I think people saying that academia doesn't have anything to offer in this field. I think that especially data science and AI, there's a lot of the innovation is coming from academia. And so you can't really ignore that if you want to stay up to date.
Favorite aspect of being a data scientist?
I think just being able to answer questions rigorously. Like I'm a very curious person, but then I like having like the confidence in my answer, or at least knowing how confident I should be in my answer.
Dream project you'd love to work on?
I think some of the stuff with these multimodal models these days, there are questions about like video and text and all of these things that I've never worked on before. I've been more in just the numbers category. So yeah, dream project would be being able to answer some huge question that I was never able to answer before using like audio and video and image data all combined.
One word to describe your journey so far?
Unique. I think that's there's no such thing as a typical data scientist.
If you weren't a data scientist, what would you be?
I in my free time, I like doing laser cutting and art stuff. So I think that would be my if I totally had to get away from the numbers, I would do visual art.
Awesome. Top productivity hack.
Just keeping track of links to things. Whether it's an official bookmarking tool or not, I find a lot of people they struggle to find things, and I'm always the one who's able to pull up the link fastest. Like the information doesn't have to be in your brain if you have a link to it to get to it quickly.
One book every tech professional should read.
Interesting. That's a hard one for every tech professional. I do think cracking the coding interview is a real classic for anyone who is trying to do technical on the spot interviews and learning those algorithms and get really comfortable with recognizing, oh, this they're asking for this. Okay, I can implement this. I can do that. Cracking the coding interview is, I think, the classic.
Perfect. We'll be sure to link it. And lastly, any parting advice for viewers we might have not touched on yet?
I think the last thing I'll say is that the tools that you're using are never the thing that you should be focusing on the most. So we say like Python or R. Really, Python has the community, the infrastructure around it. It's not necessarily that like Python is amazing and perfect. We might find that in 10 years, everyone's writing their machine learning in Rust. And so being really, really attached to the particular tools is never going to be valuable in a tech environment where things are constantly changing. It should be more about problem solving and what kind of question are you trying to answer? And then you can use whatever tool you end up having in front of you.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for the time and insights today, Erin. And a big thanks also to everybody for stopping by. No matter what your professional goals are, we hope you uncovered some valuable insights during this discussion. And if you want to forge your future in tech, whether in data science or beyond, be sure to check out Udacity's Data Scientist Nano Degree program and the rest of our catalog. We'll see you next time.